Hello everyone, my topic today is about Syria and I will be talking about the Iranian and Russia's role. So as we all know, it's located in the Middle East and it was one of the most repressive regimes there. Its borders are Turkey to the north, Lebanon and Israel to the west and southwest, Iraq to the east and Jordan to the south. So Islam is the prominent religion there and its capital is Damascus. Actually, Syria was a very calm and beautiful place which attracted visitors before the war. And its close ally are Hezbollah, Iran and Russia. So let's go back to 2011 when a popular uprising against President Bashar al-Assad called for democratic reforms and to end the repression. So that's why the conflict spread out from the anger of unemployment, decades of dictatorship, violence and restricted ideology. There's another problem, which is the society of Syria, as it's composed of Christians, Muslim, Kurdish and Armenian people, where the President Bashar al-Assad belongs to the Alawite minority and the military were fighting toward him against the armed rebels from the Sunni majority. Religious atmosphere created tension between people because the society was split between who are with the president and who are against him. We can say that this uprising was peaceful at the beginning, then it turned into a bloody civil war. So the question here is, are Russia and Iran allies or rivals in Syria? First, I will explain why Russia is involved in the Syrian civil war. So Russia has been conducting a military campaign in Syria since 2015 in order to fight against the Islamic State and other terrorist groups who are acting opposing the Syrian government. So the second goal for Russia's intervention in Syria is an attempt to regain the status of the world power that influenced global policy. The third goal for Russia was to return to the Middle East after leaving the region as a power player following the fall of Soviet Union. So it has returned not just in Syria but also in Libya. When it comes to the fourth goal, Moscow's aim was to prevent what was happening as an illegal revolution in its neighborhood. So with the Syrian opposition attempting to topple Assad. Why? Because there were a grave concern in fall of 2015 that the Assad regimes will fall within 2 weeks. Also, Moscow wanted to prove that it was capable of carrying out such an operation in another country, and it succeeded in doing so. It was also confirmed by Moscow that it was testing new weapons in Syria. So Moscow's military involvement in Syria has strengthened its position. How? Because Russia's presence there is fundamental to its entire Middle East and Africa policy, since it brought about new relationships with other countries in the regions, which now see Moscow as an influential player there. As it played a role in a new diplomatic configuration, such as Astana process talk that was held by Russia to discuss the situation in Syria by Iran and Turkey. However, Russia is expanding its air base and it won't be leaving Syria anytime soon. Why? Because if it were to depart, many numbers of agreements with the partners in the region will fall apart, as Russia wishes to stay militarily involved in Syria and it views the country as an outpost of Russian influence. Russia has indeed come to an agreement with the Syrian government to obtain a land near the Hamimim air base for its own, as well as in Tartus, because Tartus is the only way that provides Russia the access to the Mediterranean Sea. So Syria and Iran are allies in the Middle East, and propping up Assad ensures an ally against Iran's rivals such as Israel and Saudi Arabia. So Iran needs Syria to transport weapons to Hezbollah, which also opposes Israel in neighboring Lebanon. Thus, its main goal is to create a land corridor extending from Iran to Lebanon through Iraq and Syria. Why does Iran support Syria? So Syria, it's like a bridge to Iran in order to help Hezbollah in Lebanon. So if Assad falls, they will replace him by a Sunni president, and that will affect the Iranian and hinder their role in Middle East. That's why the Syrian civil war opened the door for Hezbollah in order to move eastward and build connection for Iran. Second, Syria has provided the grounds not only for Hezbollah but also to enhance their arms from Iran in order to prepare themselves for potential future war with Israel. And the third point is that both Iran and Syria share the same Shiite Islamic tradition. The question here is why Russia are pushing Iran out from the Syrian civil war. Iran may have played a key role in Syrian civil war, but Russia are aiming to remove its presence from this country. As both Iran and Russia backed the Syrian president since the early stage of the civil war, the two nations sent fundings, arms, and troops to Syria as President Bashar al-Assad gradually retaken most of the country. So why there is a question and claims that Russia's and Iran's alliance could be reached its conclusion? So it's believable that Russia started to put some pressure on Iranians to leave Damascus, and already there is some fighters who left it. So the primary reason for this is Putin's desire to expand Russia's influence in the region. Second, Iran is already exert its leverage on a significant scale in Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq. So there is reports that show that the Iranian ally Hezbollah is secretly withdrawing their troops from Damascus. So the third point is that Russia doesn't want to see Iran permanently maintain the same influence it had in Syria. Since the Iranians are sending religious people and troops to Damascus in great number, so it's like a tactic way to enter and get more influence from the back door. Another main reason is Putin's newfound alliance, which is the Turkish President Erdogan. So it seemed that Erdogan and Putin have maintained a relationship work despite some real problems. It's not surprising if there is a Russia-Turkey element for this change, because neither two countries want to give Iran the carte blanche to Syria. The conclusion, yes, Russia and Iran both are allies in Syria in front of all of us, but as you scratch the surface, you will see the ratcheting of competition. So they both want to influence the Syrian. So now it's my turn to ask you, are Russia and Iran allies or rivals in Syria? What do you think? So as a recap for what I was arguing for, first, Russia decide how the game is played, and Iran have no word. Russia doesn't need Iran in some places in Syria, especially on the south front. They want to limit Iran by not letting them exist on the eastern side of Syria. So the relationship between Iran and Russia is complex one. They are allies, but when it comes to each country interest, they act as rivals. They have many differences, but what holds between them is their anti-Americanism and desire to reduce American influence in the region. The second point is the competition over economic opportunities. Russian and Iranian forces are now control larger territories, and both are searching for economic opportunities in Syria. That's why now there are more points of friction between them than ever before. So they are competing to win contra with the Syrian regime, including the energy and power sector and other types of investments. In 2018, Russia was awarded exclusive right to produce Syria's oil and gas, as it signed a contract to use the Syrian port of Tartus for 45 years, while Iran was a bit of partially used the port of Latakia. Both countries, Iran and Russia, want to economically monopolize Syria for the long term because they each have given sizable loans to the Syrian regime government throughout the war. Many believe that the type of competition in Syria will continue, but eventually Russia's economic dominance will prevail. Thus, in the longer term, it seems that Russia and Iran don't share the same vision for Syria's influence, because Russia sees a secular Syria that is somewhat decentralized, while Iran sees something closer to the Lebanese model. And there is no doubt that Russia and Iran have different ideas about the regional balance, of which Syria should be a part, and particularly diverge on their stance toward Israel. When it comes to the third point, Russia aims to limit escalation with Iran to protect its interest in Syria. In sum, as the pressure on Damascus from Moscow and Tehran continue, the distrust between Russia and Iran could be further exposed. In fact, the two countries were never natural partners in Syria. They joined forces due to the converging interest created by and exist threat to their mutual ally. While the road ahead in Syria is anything but smooth and stability across the country remain elusive, a tug of war between Russia and Iran will be a fundamental question between Syria's post-war state institution, economic interest, and security. Those are yet to be fully addressed.